That useless old hag's already eaten up by Alzheimer's. Just transfer everything. She'll sign. My daughter-in-law laughed to my son. I stayed quiet. The words cut through me like shards of ice as I sat frozen in my bedroom upstairs. I had been looking for my reading glasses when I heard Jessica's voice drifting up through the heating vent. At 72, my hearing wasn't what it used to be, but those words came through crystal clear. "Mom's getting worse every day," my son David's voice responded, and my heart shattered a little more. Yesterday, she couldn't remember where she put her purse. Last week, she called me by Dad's name twice. Jessica's laughter was sharp and cold. "Perfect. The lawyer said we just need medical documentation of her incompetence. My friend Sarah from nursing school can help with that. A few doctor visits, some concerned observations about her memory lapses."
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
"And we'll have guardianship within 3 months. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. Not David. Not my sweet boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when his goldfish died, who promised at his father's funeral that he would always take care of me. "What about the house?" David asked, and I heard papers rustling. "It's worth at least $400,000. Maybe more with the market right now. We'll sell it immediately," Jessica replied matter-of-factly. "There's a nice little facility across town, Sunset Manor. It's cheap, and she won't know the difference anyway. The important thing is getting control of her accounts before she does something stupid with the money. The money. My life savings of $320,000, accumulated through 40 years of teaching elementary school, careful budgeting after my husband Robert died, and the small inheritance from my mother. Money I had planned to leave to David, money I thought would help secure his future and his daughter Emma's college fund. She still seems pretty sharp sometimes, though," David said, and for a moment hope fluttered in my chest. Yesterday she was helping Emma with her math homework, explaining fractions better than I could. "That's just muscle memory," Jessica dismissed. "Teachers never really lose that instinct, but you've seen how confused she gets about simple things. She put the milk in the cupboard last week. She's definitely declining." I remembered that day. I had put the milk away quickly because Emma had knocked over her juice box, and I was rushing to clean it up before it stained the carpet. Such a simple explanation, but in their narrative, it became evidence of my failing mind. "The timing is perfect," Jessica continued. "Emma will be off at summer camp next week, so she won't be around asking questions. We can have the first doctor's appointment scheduled, maybe even get her to sign some preliminary papers." My hands were shaking now. Summer camp. They had planned this around Emma's absence because my granddaughter loved me, trusted me, would question what was happening to her grandmother. 8-year-old Emma was the light of my life, the only family member who still looked at me with pure love and respect. "I feel bad about this," David said quietly, and my heart leaped with desperate hope. "Don't," Jessica's voice was firm. "David, your mother is 72 years old. She's had a good life. We have Emma to think about, our future to secure. Your teaching salary barely covers our mortgage as it is, and with my student loans, we need this money." I know. It's just—" David trailed off. "What? She raised you, so you owe her what? The chance to waste away in this big empty house, getting more confused every day? She'll be happier in a facility with people trained to deal with her condition. We're doing her a favor." The casual cruelty in her voice made me feel physically sick. This woman who had smiled at me just this morning over breakfast, who had let me believe I was a valued member of this household, was discussing my future like I was an unwanted pet they needed to surrender to a shelter. "When do we start?" David asked, and with those 4 words, he broke my heart completely. "Monday. I'll call Dr. Patterson's office. He owes me a favor from when I helped his wife get into the rehabilitation program after her hip surgery. A few leading questions about memory and confusion. And we'll have the first piece of documentation." I heard chairs scraping against the kitchen floor, footsteps moving toward the living room. They were done planning my destruction, ready to move on to more pleasant evening activities while I sat upstairs, my entire world crumbling around me. For 20 minutes I remained frozen in that spot, my reading glasses forgotten, staring at the heating vent that had just delivered the most devastating news of my life. David and Jessica were going to steal everything from me. My home, my independence, my dignity, my money. They were going to lock me away in some cheap facility while they spent my life savings on their dreams. The worst part wasn't the money, or even losing my home. It was the betrayal. David was my only child, born when I was 35 after years of trying. Robert and I had poured everything into raising him, giving him every opportunity, loving him unconditionally. When Robert died 5 years ago, David had held my hand at the funeral and promised I would never be alone. Now he was actively planning to abandon me, to steal from me, to erase me from my own life. I thought about all the signs I had missed or dismissed. The way Jessica had started questioning my decisions, suggesting I was becoming forgetful. The way David had begun treating me like I was fragile, speaking to me in that slow, patient tone people use with children or confused elderly people. The way they had gradually taken over household decisions, claiming they were just trying to help. They had been preparing for this for months, maybe longer. Every small mistake, every moment of normal human confusion, had been cataloged and weaponized against me. They weren't planning to steal from a stranger. They were planning to steal from the woman who had loved and sacrificed for David his entire life. As I finally stood up on trembling legs, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to confront them or beg them to reconsider or try to prove my competence. I was going to let them think they had won, let them believe their cruel plan was working perfectly. Because sometimes the best way to win a game is to let your opponents think they're already victorious. And Jessica and David had no idea who they were really playing against. I had been a teacher for 40 years. I had handled hundreds of difficult children, manipulative parents, and challenging situations. I had learned patience, observation, and the power of silence. They thought they were dealing with a confused old woman. They had no idea they were playing with someone who had spent 4 decades mastering the art of strategy, who understood better than anyone that the most devastating lessons are taught quietly. The game had begun, and they had just made their opening move. Now it was my turn. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the heaviness in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, mechanically stirring my coffee while David and Jessica moved around me with their usual morning routine. Everything looked exactly the same as yesterday, but now I saw it all through different eyes. "Good morning, Lillian," Jessica said sweetly, kissing my cheek as she reached for her travel mug. "How did you sleep?" "Fine, dear," I replied, forcing a smile. The endearment felt like poison on her lips now that I knew what she really thought of me. David barely looked up from his phone as he grabbed his lunch from the refrigerator. "I might be late tonight, Mom. Parent-teacher conferences?" I nodded, watching him. My son looked tired, older than his 41 years. When had those lines appeared around his eyes? When had he started avoiding my gaze during casual conversation? The signs had been there, but I had chosen to see love and concern instead of guilt and calculation. After they left for work, the house fell into its familiar silence. For 37 years, this had been my sanctuary. Robert and I had saved every penny to buy this modest 3-bedroom home when David was just a baby. We had painted every wall, planted every flower in the garden, created every memory within these walls. Now it felt like a prison where I was serving a sentence I didn't deserve. I found myself wandering from room to room, seeing everything differently. The family photos on the mantel that I had arranged with such care now seemed like evidence of a life that was about to be erased. My books, my furniture, my small treasures collected over decades of living. All of it would be swept away when they put me in Sunset Manor. The phone rang around 10 o'clock. Jessica's voice was bright and professional when I answered. "Lillian, I've scheduled a doctor's appointment for you this afternoon. Just a routine checkup with Dr. Patterson. David thought it would be good for you to establish care with someone closer to home." My grip tightened on the receiver. Dr. Patterson. The doctor Jessica had mentioned owing her a favor. "I already have a doctor, dear. Dr. Williams is so far away, and at your age, it's better to have someone nearby for convenience." Her tone was patient but firm. "David will pick you up at 2 o'clock. The appointment is at 2:30. I wanted to refuse, to tell her I could make my own medical decisions, but I forced myself to stay in character. "Oh, all right, if you think it's best." "I do. And Lillian? Dr. Patterson might ask you some questions about your memory, how you've been feeling lately. Just answer honestly, okay?" Honestly. As if honesty had any place in this conversation. After hanging up, I sat in Robert's old chair, the one David kept suggesting we should donate to charity because it was taking up space. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the man I had married, the father David used to be. Robert would have been horrified by what our son was planning. He had worked double shifts at the factory to pay for David's college, had been so proud when David became a teacher like me. "We raised a good man," Robert had whispered to me the night before he died. "David will take care of you." The memory made my chest ache. Robert had been wrong, but he had died believing in the son we thought we knew. I spent the rest of the morning thinking about the past few months, re-examining every interaction through this new lens of knowledge. Jessica's helpful suggestions about simplifying my daily routine. David's increased attention to my minor forgetfulness. The way they had started speaking about me in the third person when they thought I wasn't listening. "Mom seems more confused lately," David had said to Jessica just last week while I was in the garden. "Maybe we should think about making some changes." Changes. Such a gentle word for the complete destruction of my life. At 2:00 exactly, David pulled into the driveway. I was ready, wearing my best cardigan and carrying my purse. I had to look the part of a grandmother being cared for by her loving family. "You look nice, Mom," David said as I settled into the passenger seat. For just a moment, his voice held genuine warmth, and I remembered the little boy who used to tell me I was the most beautiful mother in the world. "Thank you, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out automatically, and I saw him wince slightly. Did he feel guilt? Or was he just annoyed that his elderly burden was being affectionate? Dr. Patterson's office was in a new medical building across town. The waiting room was full of elderly patients, and I wondered how many of them were here because their families had concerns about their mental competence. "Mrs. Morrison?" A nurse called my name after 20 minutes of waiting. David started to get up to accompany me, but I shook my head. "I can manage, dear." Dr. Patterson was younger than I expected, maybe David's age, with kind eyes but a slightly distracted manner. He shook my hand and gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. "Mrs. Morrison, your daughter-in-law Jessica tells me you've been having some memory concerns lately." I folded my hands in my lap. "I don't think so, doctor. I feel fine." "That's good to hear." He was writing notes as he spoke, not really looking at me. But sometimes family members notice things before we do ourselves. "Has anyone mentioned that you seem forgetful or confused about things?" The leading questions Jessica had mentioned. I could see how this was supposed to work. Any denial on my part would be noted as lack of insight into her condition. Any admission would be evidence of cognitive decline. "Well," I said slowly, "sometimes I misplace my glasses or forget where I put my keys. But doesn't everyone do that?" "Of course," he nodded. "But at your age, we want to be proactive about monitoring any changes. I'm going to ask you some simple questions, just to establish a baseline. What year is it?" 2024. "And who is the president?" I answered his questions. The date, my address, simple math problems. They were insulting in their simplicity, designed to make me feel like a child being tested. But I answered each one clearly and correctly. "Very good," he said, making more notes. "Now, Jessica mentioned you put some groceries away in unusual places recently. Can you tell me about that?" There it was, the milk incident, twisted into something sinister. "I was in a hurry," I explained. "My granddaughter had spilled something and I was cleaning up." "I see." More scribbling. "And have you noticed any other instances of confusion or disorientation?" I sat quietly for a moment, understanding that this man had already made up his mind before I walked into his office. Nothing I said would matter. Jessica's favor was being called in, and I was just a pawn in their game. "No," I said finally. "I haven't noticed anything unusual." "Well?" Everything seems fine today, he said, closing my file. But I'd like to see you again in a month just to check in. At your age, it's important to monitor these things closely. When I emerged from his office, David was waiting anxiously. How did it go? Fine, I said. He seems very thorough. On the drive home, David was unusually talkative. Dr. Patterson has a great reputation. Jessica says he's wonderful with older patients, very understanding of the challenges that come with aging. Challenges. Another euphemism for the decline they were so eager to document. That evening at dinner, Jessica asked about the appointment with elaborate concern. What did you think of Dr. Patterson, Lillian? Did he explain everything clearly? He was very nice, I replied, cutting my chicken into small pieces. They were both watching me eat. I realized, looking for signs of confusion, difficulty with fine motor skills, anything they could use as evidence. He wants to see me again next month, I added. That's wonderful, Jessica beamed. It's so important to have regular checkups at your age. After dinner, I excused myself early, claiming fatigue. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the full weight of my situation. They were building a case against me, one small piece at a time. The doctor's appointment was just the beginning. I thought about Emma, away at summer camp, having the time of her life while her parents planned to steal her grandmother's independence. She would come home to find me gone, locked away somewhere, and they would tell her it was for my own good. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But I had made my choice. I would stay silent, let them believe their plan was working, because eventually, every game reaches its conclusion, and the players who think they've already won are often the most surprised by the final move. 3 days after the doctor's appointment, I was watering my tomato plants in the backyard when I heard Jessica's voice through the open kitchen window. She was on the phone, and something in her tone made me freeze behind the garden shed. No, Sarah. She answered all the questions correctly, Jessica was saying. Patterson said she seemed completely lucid during the appointment. My hands trembled as I set down the watering can. Sarah, the nursing friend Jessica had mentioned. I know, Jessica continued. But we expected this. That's why we need the second phase. Can you get me those samples? Samples? My blood went cold. Perfect. Just a small amount mixed into her evening tea should do it. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make her groggy and confused for a few hours. If David witnesses a few episodes like that, he'll be more convinced we're doing the right thing. I pressed my back against the shed wall, my heart hammering so hard I was afraid she might hear it through the window. They were planning to drug me, to make me actually appear confused and disoriented so they could claim I was declining. The timing has to be right, Jessica went on. I'm thinking this weekend when Emma gets back from camp. If Emma sees her grandmother acting strange, David will feel even more justified about moving forward. Emma. They were going to use my own granddaughter as a witness to my supposedly deteriorating condition. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I'll pick them up Friday after work, Jessica said. And Sarah? Thanks for this. I know it's risky, but we really need this money. David's salary isn't enough, and with his gambling debts, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. All those evenings David claimed to be at teacher meetings or grading papers, all those times he'd seemed anxious about money, claiming it was just normal financial stress. No, he doesn't know I know about the poker games, Jessica continued. He thinks he's been so clever, but I've seen the credit card statements. $40,000, Sarah. $40,000. That's more than his annual salary. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. My son hadn't just agreed to steal from me because Jessica convinced him. He was desperate, drowning in debt from gambling, and my life savings represented his only lifeline. The lawyer said once we have guardianship, we can liquidate everything within a few months, Jessica was saying. The house, her savings, even that little life insurance policy. It'll be enough to pay off David's debts and still have money left over for our future. Life insurance policy. Robert's life insurance that was supposed to provide for me in my final years, that I had been carefully managing to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone. I have to go, Jessica said. David will be home soon, and I need to start dinner. But Friday, right? And you're sure it's safe? A pause while Sarah responded. Good. Just temporary confusion, nothing permanent. We're not monsters, Sarah. We're just doing what's necessary for everyone involved. I heard the phone being set down, then Jessica's footsteps moving toward the living room. I remained frozen behind the shed for several more minutes, trying to process what I had just learned. They were going to drug me. This weekend, when Emma returned from summer camp, they were going to slip something into my tea to make me appear confused and disoriented in front of my granddaughter. Emma would see her beloved grandmother acting strangely, and David would use that as justification for taking away my freedom. And David wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. $40,000 in gambling debt. No wonder he had looked so stressed lately, so tired and worn down. He had been living a double life, and now his lies were catching up with him. I thought about all the times over the past year when David had borrowed small amounts of money from me. $20 here, $50 there, always with a reasonable explanation. Gas for his car, a gift for Emma, unexpected expenses. I had given him the money gladly, happy to help my son when he needed it. Now I realized those small loans had probably gone straight to his poker games, and when the small amounts weren't enough anymore, he and Jessica had decided to take everything. I made my way back into the house on unsteady legs. Jessica was in the kitchen, humming while she prepared dinner, looking for all the world like a devoted daughter-in-law caring for her husband's mother. "There you are, Lillian," she said brightly. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to. How are your tomatoes coming along?" "They're doing well," I managed to say. "Should be ready to harvest soon." "Wonderful. We'll have fresh tomatoes for Emma when she gets back on Friday. She'll be so excited to see you." Friday. The day Jessica planned to begin drugging me. "I can't wait to see her," I said and meant it. Emma's return had been the bright spot I was looking forward to all week. Now it had been twisted into another weapon to use against me. That evening at dinner, I watched David carefully. The signs of stress were obvious now that I knew what to look for. The way he pushed his food around on his plate, barely eating. The dark circles under his eyes. The way his hands shook slightly when he reached for his water glass. My son was in trouble, deep trouble, and instead of coming to me for help, he had decided to destroy me. "David, you seem tired lately," I said gently. "Is everything all right at work?" He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, yeah, Mom. Just the usual end-of-school-year stress. Lots of paperwork, final grades to submit. Maybe you should take a vacation this summer," I suggested. "You and Jessica could take Emma somewhere nice." "That would be great," he said, glancing at his wife. "But we can't really afford a vacation right now." The lie came so easily to him. How many other lies had he told me over the past months? How long had he been planning this betrayal? "Well," I said, "when I'm gone someday, you'll have enough money to take Emma on wonderful trips. I want you to use my savings to give her opportunities, to make sure she has everything she needs." David's face went pale. Jessica's fork clattered against her plate. "Mom, don't talk like that," David said quickly. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to be around for years and years." "I hope so," I replied. "But at my age, you never know. I just want you to know that everything I have will go to you and Emma when the time comes. Every penny." The irony was bitter in my mouth. I was telling them they would inherit everything anyway, that they didn't need to steal from me, but they were too deep into their conspiracy to hear it. After dinner, Jessica made tea for all of us, as she had started doing recently. I accepted my cup with a smile, then excused myself to use the bathroom. While I was gone, I poured the tea down the sink and rinsed the cup. When I returned, I pretended to sip from the empty cup. "This is delicious, Jessica. What kind is it?" "Chamomile," she said. "It's supposed to be very relaxing." I continued my charade of drinking the non-existent tea, then began yawning dramatically after about 20 minutes. "I think I'll turn in early tonight," I said. "I feel unusually tired." David and Jessica exchanged a quick glance. Were they wondering if she had already started drugging me, testing to see if I was more susceptible to suggestion? In my room, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing despite my performance of exhaustion. Friday was 2 days away. Emma would be home, excited to see me, and she would witness whatever Jessica had planned. I thought about my beautiful granddaughter, so smart and loving, with her father's eyes and her grandfather's gentle nature. Emma was the one pure relationship left in my life, the only person who still loved me without agenda or calculation. They were going to use her innocent concern for me as a weapon. When Emma saw her grandmother acting confused and disoriented, her natural worry would become evidence that something was seriously wrong with me. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Make me appear confused in front of witnesses, especially my beloved granddaughter, then use everyone's concern as justification for taking control of my life. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I knew what was coming, and sometimes, knowing your enemy's plan is all you need to turn the tables. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I was already thinking about Friday, about Emma's return, and about the performance of my life that I would have to give. Because while they thought they were manipulating me, I was about to show them what a real performance looked like. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonable humidity that made the air thick and oppressive. I had been on edge all day, knowing that tonight Jessica planned to drug my tea while Emma watched. My granddaughter was due home from summer camp at 4 o'clock, and I could barely contain my excitement at seeing her again, even under these terrible circumstances. I was arranging fresh flowers from my garden in the living room when I heard David's car pull into the driveway. My heart leaped as I heard Emma's voice, bright and happy, calling out to her parents. Then the front door burst open, and my beautiful granddaughter came running toward me. "Grandma Lily!" she cried, using the special nickname she'd given me when she was 3. Her arms wrapped around my waist in the fierce hug that only an 8-year-old can give. "Oh, my sweetheart," I whispered, holding her close and breathing in the smell of sunshine and adventure in her hair. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," she said, pulling back to look at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of Robert. "I have so many things to tell you. We went canoeing and I caught a fish and we made s'mores every night and—" "Emma, let Grandma breathe," David said, but he was smiling as he carried in her camp duffel bag. For a moment, he looked like the loving father I remembered, and my heart ached for the man he used to be. "I want to hear everything," I told Emma. "But first, let me look at you. I think you've grown 3 inches while you were gone." Emma giggled and stood up straighter. "Mrs. Henderson at camp said I grew too. And look." She showed me a friendship bracelet woven in bright colors around her wrist. My cabin made these for each other. We promised to be friends forever. Forever. The word hit me like a physical blow. How much time did I have left with Emma before they took me away? How many more afternoons would we spend together in my garden, or reading stories on the porch swing, or baking cookies in my kitchen? "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I managed to say. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her smile bright and false. "Emma, why don't you go wash up and unpack your things? Grandma Lily has been tired lately, so we don't want to overwhelm her," already setting the stage, already planting the seed that something was wrong with me. "I'm fine, Jessica," I said firmly. "I want to hear about Emma's adventures." Emma looked between her mother and me, sensing an undercurrent she couldn't quite understand. "Grandma, are you sick?" The direct question from my granddaughter's innocent lips made my chest tight. "No, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. Just getting a little older, that's all." "Mom worries too much," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She worries about everything. That's what Dad says." David cleared his throat. "Emma, go get cleaned up like Mom said. You can talk to Grandma more at dinner." After Emma reluctantly headed upstairs, Jessica turned to me with that practiced, concerned expression. "Lillian, you do look tired. Maybe you should rest before dinner." "I'm fine," I repeated, but I made sure my voice sounded slightly weaker than before. If they wanted to see decline, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. The afternoon passed slowly as I waited for evening to come. Emma showed me her camp photos and told me about her new friends, her swimming lessons, the nature hikes she'd taken. Her excitement was infectious, and for brief moments I could almost forget the nightmare that was about to unfold. But then I would catch David or Jessica watching me with calculating eyes, and reality would crash back down around me. At 6 o'clock, Jessica announced dinner was ready. She had made Emma's favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs, and the kitchen filled with the comfortable chaos of family conversation. Emma chattered about camp, while David asked questions about her counselors and activities. For a few minutes, we almost looked like a normal, loving family. Then Jessica stood to clear the dinner plates. "I'll make tea for everyone," she announced. "Lillian, I got that chamomile blend you like so much. Here it was." The moment I had been dreading and preparing for all day. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. I watched Jessica in the kitchen, saw her preparing 3 cups of tea. When she thought no one was looking, she pulled a small bottle from her purse and added several drops to 1 cup, my cup. The liquid was clear, odorless, designed to be undetectable. She returned to the table with the tea service, setting the doctored cup in front of me with a gentle smile. "Here you go, Lillian. This should help you relax after such an exciting day with Emma." I lifted the cup to my lips and pretended to take a sip. The tea tasted normal, chamomile with a touch of honey, just as Jessica had promised. Whatever drug she had added was completely masked. "Delicious," I said, taking another fake sip. "Thank you, dear." Emma was still talking about camp, describing a talent show where she had performed a song. I listened and responded appropriately while carefully monitoring the cup in front of me. I had to make it appear that I was drinking the tea without actually consuming any significant amount. After about 15 minutes, I began my performance. I started slowly, blinking more often, letting my responses become slightly delayed. "Grandma, are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing immediately. Children are so much more observant than adults give them credit for. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, allowing a slight slur to creep into my words. "Just a little tired." David and Jessica exchanged a quick glance, right on schedule. "Maybe you should go to bed early tonight, Mom," David suggested. "You've had a big day." "I think I will," I said, standing up carefully and swaying just slightly. "Emma, sweetheart, come give Grandma a hug good night." Emma jumped up and hugged me, but I could see the worry in her young face. "Grandma, you seem different. Are you sure you're okay?" The concern in her voice nearly broke my resolve. I hated making her worry, hated using her love for me as part of this deception, but I had to play my role convincingly. "Just tired, my love," I whispered in her ear. "Don't worry about Grandma." But as I started toward the stairs, Emma called out something that made everyone freeze. "Grandma, wait! I forgot to tell you the most important thing about camp." I turned back, still maintaining my slightly confused demeanor. "What's that, sweetheart?" Emma's face lit up with excitement. "I met another girl there whose grandma lives in a place called Sunset Manor. She said her grandma loves it there because there are lots of other grandmas to play cards with, and they have movie nights and everything. Maybe you could visit there sometime and meet her grandma." The room went dead silent. Jessica's face went white as paper. David looked like he had been struck by lightning. Emma continued innocently. "The girl's name was Sophie, and she said her grandma moved there after her family decided she needed more friends. Sophie visits every weekend, and they have such fun together. Her grandma even teaches art classes there." I stared at my granddaughter, processing what she had just said. Sunset Manor, the cheap facility Jessica had mentioned during that first overheard conversation. Emma had met someone there whose grandmother actually lived there, and by pure coincidence, she was suggesting I visit. The irony was breathtaking. Here I was, pretending to be drugged so I could eventually expose their plan to put me in Sunset Manor, and Emma was innocently suggesting I go there to make friends. But there was something else in Emma's words that struck me as odd. She had described the place as somewhere grandmothers went when their families decided they needed more friends. That wasn't the language an 8-year-old would normally use to describe a nursing home placement. "That sounds nice, sweetheart," I said carefully, still maintaining my slightly confused act. "Tell me more about Sophie. What else did she say about her grandma?" Emma's face scrunched up in concentration. "She said her grandma was really sad when she first moved there because she missed her old house. But then she made lots of friends, and now she's happy. Sophie said sometimes families have to make hard decisions to help their grandmas, even when the grandmas don't understand at first." David cleared his throat nervously. "Emma, Grandma needs to rest now. You can tell her more stories tomorrow." But I was no longer focused on maintaining my act. Something about Emma's story didn't add up. The language she was using, the specific details. It sounded almost coached. "Emma," I said, dropping the confused persona entirely. "When exactly did you meet Sophie? What day of camp?" Emma looked puzzled by the intensity of my question. The first day? We were bunkmates." "Why, Grandma?" "The first day." Emma had been at camp for 2 weeks, which meant she had met Sophie 13 days ago. But I had only overheard Jessica's phone conversation about Sunset Manor 4 days ago. How had Emma learned about Sunset Manor before Jessica had even mentioned it? Unless Jessica had been planning this much longer than I realized. Unless Emma had been coached weeks ago, before she even left for camp, to plant the seed about Sunset Manor when she returned. I looked at Jessica's pale face, at David's guilty expression, and suddenly, I understood. They hadn't just been planning this for months, they had been planning it for much longer. Emma's innocent suggestion about visiting Sunset Manor wasn't coincidence at all. My granddaughter had been turned into an unknowing accomplice in their scheme to steal my life. The betrayal cut even deeper than I had imagined possible. They hadn't just planned to use Emma as a witness to my supposed decline. They had groomed her to be an active participant in convincing me to accept my fate. "That's very interesting, Emma," I said quietly, my voice now completely clear and steady. "Very interesting indeed." The silence in the dining room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Emma looked around at the three adults, confusion growing on her young face as she sensed the tension she couldn't understand. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked in a small voice. "Of course not, sweetheart," I said, forcing my voice to remain gentle despite the rage building inside me. "You didn't do anything wrong at all." But David and Jessica continued to stare at each other with barely concealed panic. They had just realized their carefully orchestrated plan had a fatal flaw. They had coached Emma too well, too far in advance, and now their manipulation was exposed. "Emma," Jessica said, her voice artificially bright, "why don't you go get ready for bed? It's been a long day." "But I'm not tired," Emma protested, "and I want to talk to Grandma more. She seems better now." "You're not confused anymore, are you, Grandma?" Out of the mouths of babes. My 8-year-old granddaughter had noticed what the adults were pretending not to see, that my supposed confusion had vanished the moment I dropped the act. "No, sweetheart," I said. "I'm not confused at all. In fact, I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in a very long time." David stood up abruptly. "Emma, listen to your mother. Go upstairs now." The sharpness in his voice made Emma's eyes fill with tears. She wasn't used to her father speaking to her harshly, and the change frightened her. "Daddy, why are you mad at me?" My heart broke watching my granddaughter's distress. These people were willing to traumatize their own child to carry out their scheme. "I'm not mad at you, baby," David said, his voice softening as he saw Emma's tears. "I'm just tired. We all are. Please go get ready for bed and I'll come read you a story in a little while." Emma nodded reluctantly and came over to hug me goodnight. As her small arms wrapped around my neck, she whispered in my ear, "Grandma, are you really okay? You seem sad." "I'm fine, my love," I whispered back. "Sometimes grown-ups have to have difficult conversations, but none of this is your fault. Remember that, okay?" She nodded solemnly and headed upstairs, looking back over her shoulder with worried eyes. The moment we heard her bedroom door close, Jessica turned on me with fury blazing in her eyes. "What kind of game do you think you're playing?" she hissed. "Game?" I repeated calmly. "I'm not playing any games, Jessica, unlike some people in this room." David slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. "Oh God, she knows." "Of course I know," I said, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "Did you really think you could plot against me in my own house and I wouldn't find out?" Jessica's face had gone from white to red with anger. "You have no idea what we've been through, what we've had to deal with. David has been under enormous pressure. $40,000 in gambling debts," I said quietly. "Yes, I know about that too." David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "How did you?" "The same way I know about your plan to drug me tonight. The same way I know about Dr. Patterson and his favor to Jessica. The same way I know you've already picked out Sunset Manor as my new home." Jessica stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. "You've been spying on us." "I've been living in my own house," I replied. "It's amazing what you can learn when people forget you're there, or when they assume you're too senile to understand what's happening around you." David looked like he was going to be sick. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what, David? How you decided to steal my life savings to pay for your poker games? How you enlisted your wife to drug me so you could claim I'm incompetent? How you coached my own granddaughter to suggest I'd be happier locked away somewhere?" "It's not like that," David said desperately. "We're not bad people, Mom. We needed help, and you have so much money just sitting there." "Just sitting there," I repeated. "That money I've been saving for 20 years in case I needed care in my old age. That money your father and I worked our entire lives to accumulate so I wouldn't be a burden on anyone." "You wouldn't be a burden," Jessica snapped. "You'd be taken care of. Sunset Manor is a perfectly good facility." "Have you been there, Jessica? Have you actually visited this perfectly good facility where you plan to dump me?" The silence that followed gave me my answer. "I didn't think so," I said. But I have. I went there yesterday while you two were at work. Would you like to know what I found? They both stared at me, fear replacing anger in their expressions. It's a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, I continued. 40 patients to one nurse during day shift. No activities, no stimulation. Just rows of wheelchairs parked in front of a television that nobody watches. The smell of urine and disinfectant so strong it burns your throat. David's face crumpled. Mom, we didn't know. You didn't want to know. It was easier to pick the cheapest place and tell yourselves I'd be taken care of, while you spent my money paying off David's debts and buying whatever else struck your fancy. Jessica crossed her arms defensively. We're not stealing anything. Once we have guardianship, we'll manage your assets responsibly. Responsibly? I stood up, my anger finally breaking free. You call drugging me responsibly? You call lying to doctors and coaching my granddaughter responsibly? We were trying to help you, Jessica shot back. You're 72 years old, living alone in this big house. Anything could happen to you. What if you fell? What if you got confused and left the stove on? We're trying to keep you safe. Safe, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you slip medication into someone's tea without their knowledge? Is that what you call it when you manipulate medical professionals to create false documentation? David finally looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the little boy he used to be. Mom, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. I owe some very dangerous people money, and they're not the kind of people who accept late payments. The confession hung in the air between us. Finally, the truth. David wasn't just greedy or cruel. He was desperate and terrified. Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Why didn't you just tell me you needed help? Do you really think I would have let you face that alone? David's eyes filled with tears. I was ashamed. I've been lying to everyone for so long. I didn't know how to stop. And Jessica said what? He glanced at his wife, who was glaring at him with murderous eyes. She said you'd never give us that kind of money willingly. She said old people are selfish with their money, that they'd rather die with it than help their families. I turned to look at Jessica, this woman who had been living in my house, eating my food, accepting my love and care for her family, while believing I was fundamentally selfish and uncaring. Is that really what you think of me, Jessica? She lifted her chin defiantly. I think you're a lonely old woman who uses money to control people. You paid for David's college so he'd feel obligated to take care of you. You give Emma expensive gifts, so she'll love you more than she loves us. Everything you do is about maintaining control. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. In her mind, every act of love, every generous gesture, every sacrifice I had made for this family was nothing more than manipulation. I see, I said quietly. And what about Emma? What role does she play in your version of events? Jessica's defiant expression faltered slightly. Emma doesn't understand. She's just a child you coached to suggest I visit Sunset Manor, a child you planned to use as a witness to my supposed mental decline, a child whose love for her grandmother you were willing to exploit. We never meant for Emma to get hurt, David said weakly, but you were willing to hurt her if it served your purpose. You were willing to let her watch her beloved grandmother deteriorate, to let her feel guilty for not being able to help me, to let her live with the trauma of losing me piece by piece. David broke down completely then, sobbing like the frightened child he had become. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know how it got this far. I just needed the money so badly, and Jessica said this was the only way. I looked at my son, this broken man who had been my pride and joy, and felt my heart shatter completely. The David I had raised, the one who had cried when his goldfish died and promised to always take care of me, was still in there somewhere. But he was buried under years of lies, desperation, and his wife's toxic influence. There's something else you need to know, I said quietly. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling my lawyer. I'm changing my will. Both of them looked up at me with identical expressions of panic. Every penny of my estate was going to go to you and Emma, but not anymore. You've shown me exactly what you think my love is worth. Mom, please, David started. I'm not finished, I said. I'm also going to the police. What you've done to me, the drugging, the fraud, the conspiracy, these are crimes. Serious crimes. Jessica jumped to her feet. You can't prove anything. I smiled for the first time all evening. Actually, I can. You see, I may be 72 years old, but I'm not as helpless as you assumed. For the past week, I've been recording every conversation in this house. The color drained from both their faces. Every phone call, every private conversation, Every detail of your plan has been captured, including tonight's little performance with the drugged tea. I pulled a small digital recorder from my pocket and set it on the table. This is just one of several I've placed around the house. I have more than enough evidence to send both of you to prison. The silence that followed was deafening. David and Jessica stared at the recorder as if it were a poisonous snake. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. Tomorrow morning, you're going to pack your things and leave my house. You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. After that, if I see either of you on my property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. You can't throw us out, Jessica said desperately. We have nowhere to go. What about Emma? Emma will stay with me until you find appropriate housing. I won't let your poor choices affect her education or stability. She's our daughter, David said. You can't keep her from us. I'm not keeping her from you. I'm protecting her from the consequences of your actions. The same actions that could have landed you both in prison if I hadn't discovered your plan first. I stood up, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years. I suggest you use this week to figure out how you're going to explain to Emma why her family is falling apart. But I want you both to understand something very clearly. My silence comes with conditions. Any attempt to manipulate Emma further, any attempt to turn her against me, any attempt to continue your schemes, and those recordings go straight to the police. Are we understood? David nodded miserably. Jessica remained defiant, but even she could see that her position was hopeless. Good, I said. Now I'm going to check on Emma and make sure she's not upset by all this shouting. Then I'm going to bed. I suggest you do the same. You have a lot of planning to do. As I walked toward the stairs, I heard David whisper to his wife, How did this all go so wrong? Jessica's response chilled me to the bone. It's not over yet. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse hallway, adjusting my best navy dress and checking my watch. The guardianship hearing that David and Jessica had initiated was about to begin, despite everything that had happened between us. After I had kicked them out of my house, they had become desperate enough to proceed with their original plan, hoping against hope that they could still convince a judge I was incompetent. Emma sat beside me on the wooden bench, her small hand gripping mine tightly. She looked beautiful in her yellow sundress, but her eyes held a sadness that broke my heart. The past month and a half had been difficult for her, trying to understand why her parents had moved to a small apartment across town while she stayed with me. Grandma Lily, she whispered, are they really going to try to take you away from me? I squeezed her hand gently. They're going to try, sweetheart. But sometimes when people try to do the wrong thing, the truth has a way of coming out. The truth. It had already come out in so many ways. After David and Jessica left my house, I had discovered the full extent of their betrayal. Hidden credit card statements showed David's gambling debts were actually closer to $60,000, not the 40 Jessica had mentioned. They had been planning to use my money to pay off loan sharks who had been threatening David's safety. I had also learned that Jessica's nursing license had been suspended 2 years ago for stealing medications from patients. She had never told David, instead letting him believe she was still working while she spent her days researching ways to access elderly people's assets. But perhaps most heartbreaking of all, I had found a notebook in Jessica's handwriting, detailing a timeline for my decline. She had been planning this for over a year, documenting every normal moment of forgetfulness, every time I misplaced my keys or forgot a neighbor's name. In her twisted mind, she had already convinced herself that I was genuinely developing dementia. Mrs. Morrison? A court clerk appeared in the hallway. Judge Harrison is ready to see you. We stood up together, Emma's hand still firmly in mine. As we walked toward the courtroom, I saw David and Jessica sitting at a table with their court-appointed attorney. David looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. Jessica, on the other hand, looked determined, almost triumphant. She truly believed she was going to win. They had no idea what was coming. Judge Harrison was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She reminded me of several of my former teaching colleagues, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I took my seat. This is a petition for guardianship, Judge Harrison began, looking over the paperwork in front of her. The petitioners, David and Jessica Morrison, claim that the respondent, Lillian Morrison, is suffering from dementia and is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. She looked up at me directly. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand why we're here today? Yes, Your Honor. My son and daughter-in-law believe I'm mentally incompetent and want to control my finances. David's attorney, a young man who looked barely out of law school, stood up. Your Honor, we have medical documentation from Dr. Patterson indicating that Mrs. Morrison has shown signs of confusion and memory loss. Judge Harrison nodded. I've reviewed Dr. Patterson's report. However, I noticed that this evaluation was conducted only once, and there are no follow-up assessments. Is there any other medical evidence? Well, no, Your Honor, but I see. Judge Harrison made a note. Mrs. Morrison, have you sought any independent medical evaluation? Yes, Your Honor. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. I have comprehensive evaluations from 3 different doctors, including a geriatric specialist and a neurologist, all conducted within the past month. The judge accepted the folder and began reading. I watched her eyebrows rise as she reviewed the detailed reports, all of which confirmed my complete mental competency. These are very thorough evaluations, she said after several minutes. Dr. Williams notes that your cognitive function is not only normal for your age, but actually above average. Dr. Chen states that you show no signs whatsoever of dementia or any other cognitive impairment. David's attorney looked confused. Your Honor, we weren't made aware of these evaluations because they weren't required to inform you, Judge Harrison interrupted. Mrs. Morrison has every right to seek her own medical opinions. She turned back to me. Mrs. Morrison, the original petition mentions concerns about your ability to manage your finances. Can you tell me about your current financial situation? This was the moment I had been waiting for. Certainly, Your Honor. I have $320,000 in savings and investment accounts, which I manage myself. I own my home outright, valued at approximately $400,000. I have no debt and pay all my bills on time. And how do you manage these accounts? I review my statements monthly, balance my checkbook, and meet with my financial advisor quarterly. I can provide documentation of all transactions if needed. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. That's very responsible. Now, I have to ask, are you aware of your son's financial situation? I glanced at David, who was slumping lower in his chair. Yes, Your Honor. David has significant gambling debts that have put him in danger. I believe this petition is motivated by his desperation to access my savings to pay off those debts. Mrs. Morrison, Judge Harrison said gently, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence to support this claim? I do. I reached into my folder again and pulled out a small digital recorder. Your Honor, I have recordings of conversations between David and Jessica discussing their plan to obtain guardianship over me through fraudulent means. The courtroom went dead silent. David's attorney looked stunned. Jessica's face had gone white with shock. Judge Harrison studied the recorder. Mrs. Morrison, how did you obtain these recordings? They were made in my own home, Your Honor, with my own equipment. I began recording after I overheard them discussing their plan to drug me and manipulate medical evaluations to make me appear incompetent. Drug you? Judge Harrison's voice was sharp. Yes, Your Honor. Jessica, who has a suspended nursing license, planned to slip medication into my tea to make me appear confused during family gatherings. The plan was to use my granddaughter as a witness to my supposed decline. I saw Emma's eyes widen with understanding. She finally understood why her parents had asked her so many strange questions about what she would do if Grandma seemed confused or needed help. Judge Harrison looked at David and Jessica with barely concealed disgust. These are very serious allegations. I'm going to need to hear these recordings. For the next 20 minutes, the courtroom listened to Jessica's voice discussing how to drug me, how to manipulate medical evaluations, and how to coach Emma to suggest I needed to be in a care facility. We heard David agreeing to the plan, discussing how to dispose of my belongings and spend my money. When the recordings finished, Judge Harrison removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, giving herself time to process what she had heard. In 30 years on the bench, she said finally, I have rarely encountered such a calculated attempt to defraud an elderly person. Mrs. Morrison, she turned to me, I want to commend you for your courage in exposing this scheme. She turned to David and Jessica. As for you two, I am denying this petition completely. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney for Criminal Prosecution. What you plan to do to Mrs. Morrison constitutes elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. David buried his face in his hands. Jessica sat frozen, still unable to believe her plan had failed so completely. Judge Harrison continued, Mrs. Morrison, do you have any concerns about your safety or well-being given these circumstances? Only one, Your Honor. I'm worried about my granddaughter Emma. She's been staying with me since this situation began, and I would like to ensure that she continues to have stability during this difficult time." The judge looked at Emma, who was sitting quietly beside me, taking in everything with the serious expression of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Emma," Judge Harrison said gently, "how do you feel about living with your grandmother?" Emma stood up with the dignity of someone 3 times her age. "Your Honor, my grandma Lily takes good care of me. She helps me with my homework and makes me healthy meals and reads me stories every night. She never makes me worry about grown-up problems, and she always tells me the truth." The simplicity and honesty of her words carried more weight than any expert testimony could have. "Very well," Judge Harrison said. "I'm granting temporary custody of Emma to Mrs. Morrison pending resolution of the criminal charges against her parents." As we left the courthouse that day, Emma skipping beside me in the sunshine, I felt a profound sense of peace. The game was over, and I had won not through revenge or cruelty, but through patience, truth, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. David and Jessica would face the consequences of their actions. Their plan to steal my independence and dignity had not only failed, but had cost them their daughter and their freedom. But I had gained something precious beyond measure. I had Emma, my beloved granddaughter, who would grow up knowing that love doesn't seek to control or manipulate, but to protect and nurture. That evening, as Emma and I sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, she asked me a question that made my heart full. "Grandma Lily, are you sad about Mom and Dad?" I thought carefully before answering. "I'm sad about the choices they made, sweetheart, but I'm not sad about where we are now. Sometimes when people try to take away what matters most to you, you discover just how strong you really are." She nodded solemnly, then brightened. "And we discovered that we make a pretty good team, don't we?" "The best team ever," I agreed, pulling her close as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The useless old hag had had the last word after all.